Hey, it's Cairo, and today we're talking about playing control, and more specifically, how to get in the right mindset and not make mistakes that allow you to get run over by aggro early so you can stabilize that board, play your big spells, and win more games. Every control player's been there. You draw your 7, you look at your hand, you say, I've got 3 lands, I've got a card draw spell, some removal, I'm good to go, and then you just get run over by turn 5 and the game's over and you're like, what happened? I didn't even get to play any of my stuff. So how do we stop losing by turn 5, stabilize the board, and win games? It's all about resource management. Let me go through a few examples with you. We'll start with removal. Let's imagine in this scenario you're playing blue-black control. In your hand you have 3 interaction spells. You have 1 counter spell. You have an Infernal Grasp. You lose 2 life and you can destroy a creature at instant speed. And you have a Soul Transfer, sorcery speed removal that can remove a creature or a planeswalker and also give you some upside if you control an artifact and an enchantment. So how do we know which ones to play and when? On the surface, you can kind of put a blanket statement over all of them and say, okay, these are all going to get rid of the threats that my opponent is playing. But if we dive deeper without even knowing what's in the opponent's deck, we can make some more observations here for things that aren't necessarily obvious right on the surface. Let's take a look at Counterspell. Counterspell stops a spell from resolving. There are a lot of creatures and there are a lot of spells that have really good enter the battlefield effects. So let's say that your opponent casts a spell and you wasted your counterspell on something without an enter the battlefield effect earlier, well then you're going to have to eat that enter the battlefield effect, let them gain the value off of that, and then use your Infernal Grasp on the creature and not get full value from your removal there. So let's take a look at Infernal Grasp and try to gather what the upside is of having this spell in your deck. The main upside of Infernal Grasp is that it is an instant, meaning you can play it on your opponent's turn. You can also play it in combat. You can also play it in response to your opponent putting an enchantment aura or a buff spell on one of their creatures and get a 2-for-1 and really blow out their combat step. And another tool should be used if you have to remove something during your main phase at sorcery speed. And that brings us to Soul Transfer. And Soul Transfer is the only one of these spells that can exile a planeswalker when it already hits the field. You can counter it, but you're not going to be able to Infernal Grasp it. So, should you save it for a planeswalker? Well, that all depends. If you're playing mono red aggro, where they run very few planeswalkers, Soul Warden should be considered basically just a creature removal spell that you can play on your main phase. But you also want to look at the upside here. You want to control an artifact and enchantment so you can get that additional upside of bringing something back from your graveyard to your hand. Now, if you're under a ton of pressure, you're going to have to burn this early as turn 3, but if you're not, and you can counter a clutch thing, you can get that upside later. And this also applies to sweepers. Every good control deck has a sweeper or two, but you don't want to play it too early. I know the board looks really nice whenever they have 2 things out and you can just sweep it and you clear it out and you're like, nice clean board. But really, you want to wait and use your life total as a resource. Make sure that you're getting the maximum value out of your sweeper. Don't just do it just to get rid of a few creatures early. Also keep an eye on the power and toughness. If they have 2 or 3 1/1s that don't really do anything every turn, can you afford to wait? Probably. If they have 2 or 3 3/1s or 3/2s that are really hyper aggressive creatures, can you afford to wait? Probably not. So always be making that assessment every single turn when a new creature hits the board. How many turns do I have before I die if this board stays the same way and they get in damage on me every turn? The last thing I'm going to talk about today is the mindset. If you're new to playing control, you might be more aggressive than you really need to be. Your job is not really to push damage as a control deck. And I even sometimes slip into this. If I'm going from playing aggro for a few days into a control deck, I'll find myself attacking where like I really shouldn't be, right? So it's a thing that you need to keep in mind on a constant basis. Look, my job is not to win this game by turn 5. My job is to make sure the board is clean and nice so that way I can play my turn 6, turn 7, turn 8 finisher. So to summarize, prioritize your spells correctly. Always use the bare minimum that you can to get rid of the opponent's threats. And use your life total, and it's always that sliding scale of using a little bit here, a little bit there. Don't sweep the board when you don't have to. Make sure that you're really looking at the board state and saying, can I just block this thing, or does it really require a removal spell? If you have any other tips or suggestions, please leave them in the comments below. I know there's going to be a lot of players that are watching this, especially newer control players or people that are kind of like wanting to brush up. And if you have tips for them, leave them in the comments below. If you're wanting more tips, go to the comments and see what other players are doing. There's also another video in this series about playing aggro versus control, and I'll leave that link in the description. Thanks for hitting the thumbs up if you liked the video. Thanks for subscribing, and I'll see you next time.